The wind howled like 1,000 banshees, tearing at the sails of the Black Serpent as it surged through the storm-lashed waters. Waves taller than a man crashed against the hull, sending cold sprays of seawater over the deck. Captain Rhea Ironclad Vargas stood at the helm, her dark hair whipping in the gale, eyes fixed on the jagged silhouette of Dead Man's Cove ahead. Her knuckles tightened on the wheel as lightning illuminated the cursed cliffs, revealing the treacherous rocks hidden just beneath the surface. "Hold steady, you dogs," Vargas shouted over the roar of the storm. Her voice was a sharp command that cut through the chaos. The crew scrambled to obey, securing lines and bracing themselves as the ship pitched violently. It had been days of sailing into this accursed storm, but no treasure worth its salt came without risk. But tonight the risk was more than they bargained for. "There, dead ahead!" cried Crow, the ship's lookout, pointing a trembling finger into the black abyss. A ship appeared out of nowhere, its black sails fluttering in the windless fog, green light glowing faintly from the hull like the flame of a death candle. The ghost ship of Dead Man's Cove. Fear rippled through the crew, seasoned pirates who had seen battles with the King's Navy and faced monstrous sea creatures. Yet none dared meet the eyes of the dead. The tales of the ghost ship were whispered in taverns across the Caribbean. Ships that sailed too close never returned. They became part of the cursed fleet, the crew doomed to wander the seas, bound to the treasure they failed to claim. Captain Vargas gritted her teeth. This treasure belongs to the living, not the dead. Her gaze locked on the glowing ship, refusing to back down. "Stay the course, we've come too far to turn back now." Before we dive into this dangerous adventure, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The Black Serpent sailed directly into the path of the ghost ship, its spectral glow eerily close as it floated alongside them. A cold, unnatural wind swept across the deck, and the temperature dropped. The crew whispered prayers to gods long forgotten, but Captain Vargas held fast. "Ready the guns," she ordered, though the command made little sense. How could cannonballs pierce the veil between the living and the dead? Still, she wouldn't show fear. Not in front of her crew. They reached Dead Man's Cove, the ship groaning as it slipped into the narrow inlet between the cliffs. The ghost ship followed like a shadow, its presence a reminder that they were not alone on this cursed quest. The shore loomed ahead, scattered with the wreckage of ships from centuries past, their bones bleaching in the moonlight. "Lower the anchor! Get the boats ready," Vargas commanded, her eyes scanning the cliffs for any sign of movement. They couldn't afford to linger here long, not with that cursed ship breathing down their necks. The treasure was said to be hidden deep in the island's jungle, locked in a stone vault that hadn't been touched by mortal hands for centuries. But it wasn't the treasure that worried the crew. It was what guarded it. "Captain," Crow whispered, his face pale under the stormy sky. "Maybe we should leave this place. We ain't meant to take what belongs to the dead." Vargas fixed him with a cold stare. "The dead can't spend gold, Crow. We can. Now get moving." She led a small party ashore, her boots sinking into the wet sand as the jungle beyond loomed like the maw of a waiting beast. Shadows shifted between the trees, and every rustle of the wind felt like an unseen hand grasping at them. As they ventured into the jungle, following the map that had brought them here, Vargas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ghost ship lingered offshore, barely visible through the mist, but its crew wasn't the only threat on this island. The ground beneath their feet was slick with mud, and ancient bones jutted from the earth like silent warnings. Vargas ignored them, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. The map spoke of a hidden altar deep within the jungle, where the treasure was said to rest, untouched for centuries. But as they neared the altar, a low rumble echoed through the trees. The earth trembled, and Vargas halted, her hand instinctively going to the cutlass at her side. Something was coming. A shape moved through the fog, a towering figure draped in tattered robes, its face hidden beneath a hood. It wasn't one of the ghostly crew from the ship. This was something far older, far more dangerous. "We've disturbed something we shouldn't have," one of the crew whispered, his voice trembling. Vargas drew her blade, the sound of steel against leather sharp in the thick silence. "We've come for the treasure," she said, her voice steady. "And we're not leaving without it." The figure stepped forward, a hollow voice emerging from the darkness. The treasure is not for the living. Leave now, or join the damned. The oppressive heat of the jungle mixed with the suffocating tension as Captain Vargas and her crew pressed onward. The figure that had warned them melted into the fog, its voice still ringing in their ears. No one spoke, but the unease hung over them like a curse. The jungle's twisted trees loomed overhead, casting long, finger-like shadows across the narrow path. The underbrush crackled beneath their boots as they marched deeper, guided by the cursed map. The promise of treasure was all that kept them moving. Every step took them closer, but the weight of unseen eyes followed them. Each one could feel it, like the breath of death on the back of their necks. "Something's wrong, Captain," muttered Kellen, the burly quartermaster who had been with Vargas through more than a few scrapes. "The air ain't right. Feels like it's watching us." Vargas kept her gaze forward. "It's just the jungle playing tricks on you." But she knew better. This island, Dead Man's Cove, was cursed. Everyone who sailed near these shores heard the legends, how those who sought the treasure of the Revenant's plunder never returned. But Vargas wasn't one to run from curses or ghosts. Gold was gold, and no amount of phantom sailors could scare her off. The path opened suddenly into a clearing, dominated by the ancient stone altar. A massive black chest sat atop it, engraved with symbols none of them recognized. A faint green glow pulsed from beneath the lid. Vargas approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees for signs of movement. The jungle was silent. Too silent. "I don't like this," muttered Crow, the lookout, his sharp eyes darting around. "Feels like a trap." "You signed up for danger, Crow," Vargas said, her voice edged with impatience. "You want to be rich? Or do you want to cower in the corner like a landlubber?" Crow shut his mouth, though the tension in his eyes remained. Vargas stepped up to the altar, her fingers grazing the cold surface of the stone. She paused, then lifted the heavy lid of the chest. Inside lay a mass of gold coins, darker than any treasure she had ever seen, shimmering in the strange light. Jewels the size of her fist lay scattered among the coins, their surfaces marred by ancient cracks. This was the treasure they'd come for, riches beyond their wildest dreams. But as she reached for the nearest coin, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The jungle itself seemed to groan as the earth shook, cracks spreading outward from the altar. The coins within the chest began to shift, clattering together as if they were alive. A chill ran down Vargas's spine, and she pulled her hand back, gripping her cutlass instead. Behind her, the crew gasped as shadowy figures began to emerge from the jungle. Silent, spectral forms draped in rotting naval uniforms, their hollow eyes fixed on the treasure. "It's them!" shouted Crow, stumbling back. "The Phantom crew! They've come for us!" The ghostly figures advanced, weapons in hand, but no sound accompanied their movements. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark pits. Each step they took drained the warmth from the air, the jungle's heat replaced with a bone-chilling cold. "Back to the ship," Vargas ordered, but Kellen grabbed her arm. "We can't just leave it," he growled, his eyes fixated on the cursed gold. "This is what we came for. We risked everything." But Vargas wasn't listening. The ground beneath them was crumbling, giving way to a deep chasm. A force, unseen but palpable, was drawing the treasure and the crew into the abyss. With a snarl, she wrenched herself free from Kellen's grip. "The treasure's cursed. Leave it, or we all die here." Reluctantly, the crew turned and ran, but not before Kellen snatched a handful of the cursed gold. The second his fingers closed around the coins, a scream echoed through the clearing. It wasn't human. It was something older, more terrifying. The sound seemed to tear through the fabric of the world itself, and the ghostly crew surged forward with new fury. They fled, crashing through the jungle as the wails of the dead echoed behind them. Vines whipped at their faces, and branches clawed at their arms, but none of them slowed down. The earth continued to shake, the island itself protesting their presence. As they broke through the tree line and stumbled onto the beach, the sight that greeted them was far worse than anything they had imagined. The Black Serpent was under siege. The ghost ship hovered above the water, its green glow illuminating the scene of terror below. Ghostly sailors swarmed over the deck of the Black Serpent, their blades flashing as they cut down the living crew. Vargas watched in horror as her men fought desperately against enemies they couldn't touch. Every blow passed through the phantoms, but the ghost swords found flesh. "We have to get back," Vargas shouted, her voice breaking through the paralyzing fear. "We can't let them take the ship." The small group charged forward, throwing themselves into the icy surf and wading toward the boat, but the ocean itself seemed to rise against them, waves pulling them back toward the shore as if the island didn't want to let them go. Vargas gritted her teeth, fighting the current as the cold fingers of the dead seemed to drag her deeper into the water. For a brief moment, she felt the weight of Kellen's mistake. The cursed gold had bound them to this place. But now wasn't the time for regret. They needed to survive. She broke through the waves and hauled herself up onto the deck, just as a cannon fired from the ghost ship. The explosion rocked the Black Serpent, and Vargas barely held on as the ship shuddered under the impact. "They're everywhere!" screamed one of the crew, his sword slicing through empty air as another phantom passed right through him. Vargas caught a glimpse of Kellen fighting near the mast, his eyes wild with fear as he swung at the ghosts. In his hand, the cursed gold gleamed, and for a moment, Vargas understood the island's cruel magic. It wasn't just about stealing treasure. It was about binding those who took it. The ghosts were drawn to the gold, and they would not stop until the ones who stole it joined their ranks. With grim determination, she sprinted across the deck, dodging through the chaos, and reached Kellen. "Drop the gold," she shouted, her voice cutting through the madness. Kellen looked at her, his face twisted with greed and terror. "We can't just give it back. It's ours now." Before she could respond, a spectral blade slashed across his chest. He fell, the cursed coins spilling from his hand as he crumpled to the deck, blood pouring from the wound. The ghosts surged toward the fallen gold, their hollow eyes glowing with otherworldly hunger. Vargas knew what had to be done. With a swift motion, she kicked the cursed treasure overboard. As the last coin vanished beneath the waves, a deafening wail rose from the ghost ship. The spectral crew froze in place, their forms flickering like dying flames. The Black Serpent rocked violently as the ghost ship began to dissolve into the mist, taking with it the souls of the damned. But the battle wasn't over yet. The cursed island still had a hold on them, and the waves began to pull harder at the ship, dragging it toward the jagged rocks that surrounded Dead Man's Cove. Vargas shouted to the crew, "We need to get out of here now, or we're all dead." The remaining sailors rushed to their stations, desperately trying to steer the ship away from the hungry sea. The Black Serpent lurched violently as the ocean seemed to rise in rebellion. The cursed island, now fully awakened by the theft of its gold, fought to pull them back, its jagged rocks looming like the fangs of some monstrous beast. Captain Vargas barked orders, her voice a razor-sharp command in the storm of panic. "Cut the anchor! Get the sails up! We're not dying here!" The remaining crew scrambled across the deck, frantically trying to follow her orders. The ghostly wail of the dissolving phantom ship still echoed in the air, but it was no longer their greatest threat. The island itself had become their enemy. Waves crashed against the hull with unnatural force, dragging the ship toward the rocky cliffs that surrounded Dead Man's Cove. The water, black and thick as ink, seemed alive, its tendrils of foam lashing at the ship with vengeful fury. Vargas, soaked and bloodied, gripped the wheel with white-knuckled determination. The cursed map still burned in her mind, the treasure they had sought now turning on them. As the ship strained against the pull of the sea, she knew their only hope was to break free of the island's grip. "Turn her to starboard," she shouted to Kellen, but her voice faltered when she saw him. Kellen, clutching his chest where the phantom's blade had cut deep, stood unsteadily near the mast. His eyes were glazed, his breathing shallow. The cursed coins, though lost to the sea, had already marked him. "We need you, Kellen!" Vargas shouted, but he barely heard her over the roar of the storm. Crow, the sharp-eyed lookout, limped across the deck, clutching the ropes as the ship tilted dangerously toward the cliffs. "Captain, the rocks are dead ahead," Vargas cursed under her breath. They were out of time. The cliffs loomed closer, and the current was dragging them straight into the jagged maw. If they hit, they'd be torn apart like so many ships before them. Just another wreck added to the island's collection. The crew scrambled to adjust the sails, fighting the wind and waves, but it wasn't enough. The cliffs grew larger, the sound of crashing waves deafening. Vargas knew they wouldn't survive the impact. Her heart raced as she weighed her options. There was only one way out. The treasure's curse. It's not just the gold, it's the island, Vargas shouted, her voice barely carrying over the storm. We have to break its hold, or we're dead. The crew exchanged fearful glances. How could they fight an island? The ghost ship had vanished, but the curse had not. The wind whipped at them, and Vargas felt the invisible chains tightening, pulling them back into the maw of the cursed cove. Kellen stumbled toward her, his face ashen. He coughed, blood staining his lips. Captain, I can feel it, say like it's inside me. Vargas grabbed him by the collar, shaking him. Don't you give up on me, Kellen. We need you to survive this. But Kellen's eyes were already distant. I'm marked, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I took the gold. It's inside me now. Vargas's heart pounded. The cursed coins, Kellen had touched them, claimed them. The curse wouldn't stop until it claimed his soul. And as long as Kellen was aboard, the island wouldn't let them leave.
Hey there! Quick message, grab a paper, write down. You Pirate. Our channel name. Come back soon, we've got incredible stories you won't want to miss.
She knew what had to be done, but the thought of it nearly tore her apart. Kellen had been her right hand for years, loyal to a fault, but the curse wouldn't be satisfied until it claimed him fully, and through him, the rest of the crew. The ship groaned, the cliffs just feet away. There was no more time. Kellen, Vargas's voice softened for the first time, a rare glimpse of the woman beneath the hardened captain. I'm sorry. Kellen looked up at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. He nodded, a faint, sad smile crossing his lips. You have to do it, Captain. I won't let them take you. With a heavy heart, Vargas drew her cutlass. Kellen's legs gave out beneath him, and he fell to his knees, blood seeping into the cracks of the deck. He looked up at her one last time. Make it quick, he whispered. Vargas hesitated for only a moment before plunging the blade into his heart. Kellen gasped, his body trembling as the life drained out of him. As he fell, the cursed island seemed to scream in protest. The waves surged higher, but then the pull on the ship lessened. The curse had claimed its price. Turn the ship, Vargas roared, her voice filled with fury and grief. Now! The crew, though shaken by the grim sacrifice, sprang into action. The sails caught the wind, and with one final heave, the Black Serpent broke free from the island's grasp. The cliffs slid past, mere feet from the hull as the ship sped into open water. The storm, as if sensing its defeat, began to fade. The waves calmed, the wind died, and the oppressive presence of the island fell away. But even as they escaped the deadly grip of Dead Man's Cove, the price of their freedom hung heavily in the air. Kellen's body lay still on the deck, and the crew gathered around it, silent. Vargas stood over him, her cutlass still dripping with blood, her face set in stone. She had won the battle, but the victory tasted bitter. Crow, ever the watchful one, spoke up from the edge of the deck, his voice trembling. We survived, Captain. But at what cost? Vargas didn't answer. She turned away from the crew, staring out into the horizon where the ghost ship had vanished into the mist. The curse might have been broken, but she knew better than to believe it was gone for good. The sea held its secrets, and there were always debts left to pay. The Black Serpent sailed on, its crew fewer but alive. The treasure was lost, the ghosts gone, but the legend of Dead Man's Cove would never die. As the ship faded into the distance, the island remained, watching, waiting for the next crew foolish enough to seek the Revenant's plunder. The dawn broke over the horizon, casting pale light across the deck of the Black Serpent. The storm had passed, leaving the ship limping through calmer seas. Yet the weight of the night's events hung over the crew like a pall. They moved silently, avoiding each other's eyes, their usual rowdy chatter replaced by an eerie quiet. The ghostly wail of the island and the blood-stained deck served as a grim reminder of their near brush with death. Captain Vargas stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the empty ocean ahead, but her mind still locked on the jagged cliffs of Dead Man's Cove. She had escaped, but the victory felt hollow. The crew had survived, but not all of them. Kellen, her right hand, was gone, sacrificed to the curse that had nearly claimed them all. His blood had sealed their freedom, and the price weighed heavily on her shoulders. Crow approached cautiously, his normally sharp eyes dull with exhaustion. "Captain, we're clear of the cove," he said, his voice low. "What are your orders?" For a moment, Vargas didn't respond, her thoughts drifting to the cursed treasure they had come so close to claiming. That blackened gold still gleamed in her mind's eye, and with it, the phantom ship that had haunted their every move. The Revenant's plunder had taken its toll, just like the legends said it would. But legends could be rewritten. Vargas finally turned to face Crow, her expression hard. "Set a course for Tortuga," she ordered. "We need repairs, and the crew could use some rest." Crow nodded, though his brow furrowed in confusion. "Tortuga? We're not going back to the treasure?" Vargas's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Not yet, but this isn't over." The crew, though weary and shaken, perked up at her words. They had lost comrades, been haunted by ghosts, and narrowly escaped death. But the lure of the treasure still had its claws deep in their souls. That gold was cursed, yes, but it was still gold. And pirates never walked away from a fortune. As the Black Serpent turned north, leaving Dead Man's Cove behind, Vargas knew that this was far from the end of their story. The sea was vast, and though they had escaped the island's grip for now, she could still feel its pull. The curse had taken Kellen, but it hadn't claimed her. Not yet. Days passed as the ship limped across calm waters. The crew worked in grim silence, the absence of their fallen comrades a heavy weight on their shoulders. They had left behind the cursed island, but the memory of the ghostly crew, the phantom ship, and the deadly pull of the Revenant's plunder lingered in the air. Every night, Vargas would stand on the deck, gazing out at the horizon, half expecting to see the glow of ghostly sails in the distance. It wasn't until they reached the pirate haven of Tortuga that the weight of their ordeal began to lift. The bustling harbor welcomed them with the familiar chaos of pirate life. Ships docked in various states of disrepair, taverns overflowing with drunken laughter, and the salty air filled with the smell of ale and gunpowder. It was a welcome change from the ghostly silence of Dead Man's Cove. But even in the relative safety of Tortuga, Vargas couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal wasn't over. She moved through the streets with purpose, seeking out contacts, gathering information. The legends of the Revenant's plunder had been around for centuries, but few had come as close as she had to unlocking its secrets. The island's curse was powerful, yes, but curses had a way of breaking under the right pressure. As she sat in a dimly lit tavern that night, nursing a mug of rum, a man slid into the seat across from her. He was older, his skin weathered by years at sea, with a thick scar running across his face. His name was Renard, a pirate with a reputation for knowing things most men didn't, and he had been expecting her. "You made it back," Renard said, his voice a rasp. "I wasn't sure if you'd return." Vargas raised an eyebrow. "I always return." Renard chuckled, but his expression turned serious as he leaned forward. "Word around the docks is you were looking for the Revenant's plunder, and from the look of you, I'd say you found it." "We found something," Vargas replied carefully, "but it wasn't what we expected." Renard's eyes gleamed with interest. "The treasure's cursed, Captain. It always has been, but the stories don't tell you everything. There's more to that treasure than gold and jewels. It's tied to something much darker." Vargas leaned in, intrigued. "What do you know about it?" Renard smiled thinly. "I know that the ghost ship that followed you, it wasn't just guarding the treasure. It was bound to it. The treasure wasn't theirs to protect. It was theirs to take back. Every crew that tries for the gold ends up feeding that curse. But there's a way to break it. And what way is that?" Vargas asked, her voice low, steady. Renard leaned back, his scarred face slipping into shadow. "You have to give it back, or find something even more valuable." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Vargas stared into her rum, her mind racing. The cursed treasure wasn't gone. It was still out there, waiting for the next foolhardy crew to seek it out. And now, she had a choice. She could forget the treasure, let it go, and continue living the life of a pirate, raiding, plundering, and sailing free. Or she could risk everything, return to the island and break the curse once and for all. But that decision would have to wait. Vargas rose from her seat, tossing a coin onto the table. "We'll see about that, Renard." As she left the tavern, the familiar sound of the bustling pirate town surrounded her. But in the back of her mind, the ghost ship still sailed. The Revenant's Plunder was still out there, and though the Black Serpent had escaped its curse for now, Vargas knew that some things never truly stayed buried. The sea always called, and when it did, she would be ready. If you've enjoyed this tale of curses, ghost ships, and high-stakes treasure hunts, hit that subscribe button to follow you, pirate. The adventure is far from over. There's always another treasure to seek, another mystery to uncover, and another curse waiting to be broken. Share this video with your crew and get ready for the next adventure, because on the high seas, the dead don't stay quiet for long.